everyone. Welcome in another episode of the Wobcast 2.0 coming at you. It's yours truly, Wobby, joined as always by my partner and co-host Gyles. Excited to come to you today with some position evaluations for the Minnesota Vikings and the NFC North as we get to the running back position. Also, we talk some other news and notes about your favorite team and your favorite sport, the Vikings and the National Football League. Lots to get to today. As always, it's my partner Gyles who's going to help us get through it. Let's bring him in right now and say hello to Gyles. Hey, bud, how's it going?
Hey, happy Monday. Best day of the week.
Right.
Excited to chat through arguably one of the most controversial positions in football, running back. I think not only for the Vikings, it'll be interesting to see where we rank in the NFC North, but in the entire NFL, I think that's kind of a hot topic right now. There's a lot of free agents right now. There's some people holding out, people holding in. I think there's a lot of shoes to drop, so to speak, in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I think so, and you are right. It's been the running back position much discussed later in the summer as training camp sort of started. The depressed market of this position group because the lack of big contracts, the presence of running backs being franchise tagged, and then high quality free agents not able to sign deals, including former Minnesota Viking Dalvin Cook. It kind of prompted this group of players to get together and to discuss it. They had a Zoom meeting, I guess, and talked about the depressed market. I don't know really whatever came of that, if it's just misery loves company, and or if they actually came up with a plan. I'm guessing they actually came up with a plan, although I don't really know what that is. But you got guys like Josh Jacobs can't get a long-term deal. Saquon Barkley did sort of reach some middle ground with the Giants and like a one-year extension, but he's not getting a long-term deal. Dalvin Cook remains unsigned. Other good players remain unsigned. So, a position group that there's a lot of good players and good talent in this position group, and they're important on the team, but teams are just not valuing them, or at least not showing that they value them with high-priced contracts. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that, and we can get into it if we want. But it wasn't that long ago, Gyles, when running backs, the New Orleans Saints traded their whole draft to get Ricky Williams, and the Minnesota Vikings used the 7th overall pick on Adrian Peterson. Heck, it was not that long ago when the Giants used the 2nd overall pick on Saquon Barkley. So, it's definitely a position group that's sort of had some peaks and valleys. But in the NFC North, I think there's a handful of players worth talking about. And this was, we get into the running back position, Gyles, and we've done every position on the roster now except for DBs, except for the safeties and corners. And, some of those positions, the challenge in evaluating them is you can watch tape if you want, but it's, you talk about the interior of the offensive line or the interior of the defensive line, inside linebackers. There's not a lot of stats to go off of. It's harder to do some research on them. So you and I have found it pretty enlightening to go through this exercise for those reasons. You become more educated on those players. The running back position, the stats are there. The highlights are there. It's a very noticeable position when you're watching football every day. So this was a little bit of an easier one for me to sort of evaluate. And I think for people listening and following along, they're going to know most of these names, certainly the top 2 for each team. So it'll be fun to see where we each landed on these evaluations, who we identified in each team's group, and what grade we gave them. So I think we're aligned here on this one. 3 running backs per team. We did RB1, RB2, and then an RB3. The grading scale will go 0 to 10 for the RB1, 0 to 7 for RB2, and then 0 to 3 for RB3. And we'll evaluate all these players, stack them up, and see where the Vikings sit relative to their foes in the NFC North. You ready to roll on this one?
Let's rock and roll.
All right. We'll start. We go alphabetically, so we'll start with the Chicago Bears, and I'll go first. Gyles will follow up and clean up the mess that I leave behind after providing my grade. So, Chicago Bears, RB1, Khalil Herbert. Pretty decent grade last year from a PFF standpoint. He actually, Gyles, averaged 5.7 yards per carry last year, which is a pretty remarkable number. I believe it was 2nd in the NFL. He's a runner that suits my eye pretty well. I actually appreciate his style. Physical runner, can go between the tackles, has a low center of gravity, Usually delivers a blow, a workman-like player. I don't think he's a real dual threat. I don't think he's great on third down. He can't catch a lot of he doesn't catch a lot of passes, but a fairly solid player here. And I think in the new world of the running backs, where you're not spending the second overall pick on them, you're not giving them $20 million per year, you're looking for a guy who can sort of just put in an honest day's work and help you move the chains. I think he's everything you could want out of a back of that style. He's not a game changer, but he's a solid player. I ended up on a scale of 0 to 10, I'm right in the middle on Herbert. I gave him a 4. I think he's a player you want to upgrade on eventually over time. I don't think he's a franchise long-term starter for you, but I think he can get the job done in the interim. So middle of the pack grade there on Herbert. RB2 for the Bears is Deonta Foreman, who's jumped around the league a little bit. Houston Texans, Carolina Panthers, I believe. Actually graded higher than Herbert did last year. 4.5 yards per carry. Also not a true dual threat, not a 3-down back per se. But like Khalil Herbert, he can run between the tackles. He can run outside. Got a little bit of physicality to him. He's a bigger body. A little bit of an upright runner, but a physical player and a guy who can really be a solid RB2. This is a situation for me with Foreman where if he was your starting running back, he'd be down like at a 2 or a 3, a pretty low number, but he's the RB2. He's your backup. And I think that's good. So on a scale of 0 to 7, he comes in at a 5 for me. And then lastly is Rashawn Johnson, a 4th-round rookie out of Texas. Actually backed up or complemented Bijan Robinson, who was a high draft pick in this year's draft. So I think Johnson probably a little bit under the radar, Gyles, a little better player maybe than the numbers would indicate. Nearly 6 yards a carry. And the interesting part here about Johnson is, the modest low grades that I gave Herbert and Foreman will suggest that there's opportunity there, and Johnson can seize on that and could end up being a year from now when we're doing this. He may be the RB1 that we are evaluating. So I think there's good upside here. Really good player. I actually did do the standard YouTube search of Johnson highlights from Texas, and he's a fun player to watch. So,
oh my goodness, yes.
I gave him a 3 on a scale of 0 to 3. He grades out perfectly for an RB3. I think he'd be a decent RB2 for the Bears, but he'll be in the 3rd spot to start the season. So, a 4 for Herbert, a 5 for Foreman, a 3 for Johnson comes out to a 12 for the Chicago Bears.
There we go. For my evaluation, starting with Mr. Herbert over there, I think you did a pretty good job kind of evaluating who he is as a person. He's 25 years old, 5'9", 212 pounds from Virginia Tech. Obviously, he was drafted in 2021. He got a 72.5 grade last year. He had 129 carries and 732 yards, which, like you mentioned, was 5.7 yards per carry, which is pretty phenomenal. My goodness, if you can replicate that again in 2023, I think the Bears have found themselves in a pretty good position considering what they've done to upgrade the rest of their offensive weapon sets. So when you evaluate his contrast between yards per carry to his rushing and pass blocking, I think he is towards the bottom of the league. I would say he's in the bottom third for pass blocking, which is something that a running back needs to do, especially in a Bears offense. When you think about rushing, he was about 33rd out of 60 qualified running backs last year. I think he was the 36th overall graded running back out of 60 qualified running backs. So in some areas, like yards per carry, he's phenomenal. But in other areas, I think he has some work to do. So all that to say, I did give him a 6 out of 10. I think his yards per carry speaks for itself. So I did give him a 6 out of 10, which obviously pairs very well when you move over to Foreman at RB2. He's 27 years old, 6 foot flat. He's 235 pounds from Texas, like you mentioned. He was drafted in 2017 by the Texans. He actually had a better PFF grade even than RB1 at a 73.1 grade. He had 203 carries for 913 yards. This guy actually did fairly well. He almost had 1,000 yards last season. He had 5 touchdowns and had 4.5 yards per carry, which is pretty good. He did have 3.3 yards after contact, which is something I really like to see in a running back. That overall elusiveness. He was 34th ranked running back out of 60 qualified running backs last year. He was just about dead last in pass blocking, so I think there's some improvement that needs to be happening there. But out of a scale of 7, I did give him a 3, which moves you into RB3 for Mr. Johnson, Rashawn Johnson. This guy I have a lot of high hopes for. Obviously came from Texas Longhorns. There was only a few games that he didn't score in the high 70s when it comes to PFF. The entire 2022 season, he had an 88.3 grade. He did fairly well in run. He was a great fumbler, or like great from a fumble perspective. He had good hands. So I do see some pretty significant upside with him, but he is still a rookie, so I gave him a 2 out of 3, which brings the entire Bears unit to 11 out of 20.
Okay, so we're pretty similar here. You're at 11. I'm at 12. I think the general summary here for this room in Chicago, Gyles, they lost their leading rusher last year in David Montgomery, who goes to another team in the NFC North. So we'll talk about Montgomery and that team in a moment. And the Bears didn't leave that room untouched. They drafted Johnson, but they really were okay with letting Herbert and Foreman step up and be the guy and see if Johnson can beat them. So I don't think there's anything to be super excited about here as they enter the season, other than just keep your eyes peeled for Rashawn Johnson, who could end up being a pretty good player for the Bears. And so you make a good point, though, when you mention that we actually came away from the other offensive positions for the Bears fairly impressed this going into this season, particularly the wide receivers, where they traded for DJ Moore, they traded for Chase Claypool last year, and are trying to bring him along and get him ingratiated into the offense, and then they have Darnell Mooney. So it's a talented crop of receivers. The tight ends are okay, and then the running backs are okay, and they've got a guy to watch. So plus they have Fields, who they're hoping can make the next step. The whole key for the Bears is Justin Fields and being able to take that next step. I believe he's got the tools around him to be able to do that. So we'll see if it happens, and if it does, the Bears would be a tough out. I think they were a 3-win team last year. It was embarrassing. They're not going to be that this year. I think they're going to be a little bit better. So I'm not going to say a surprise team, or I'm not going to put them up there as a potential division winner. There's a lot of hyperbole around that, and the MVP odds for Fields, I think that's going a little too far, but I don't think the Bears are a team you just steamroll twice a year and you count on sweeping them. I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult than that this year with the Bears. So, all right, move on to the Detroit Lions and their running back room. This is where the Bears' leading rusher from last year, David Montgomery, ended up going. He is their RB1 heading into the 2023 season. I look at Montgomery, Gyles, and I'll be curious to hear some of your analysis of him and some of the numbers, because I don't think from a scientific standpoint, when you look at numbers and the PFF data, he necessarily grades out as well as I think he actually plays and impacts the game. I think he impacts the game because he's a big physical runner who can do anything you ask from the running back position. He didn't have the yards per carry that maybe you would be accustomed to seeing from someone of his caliber, and he didn't have the yards per carry that his backup had last year, right? Khalil Herbert. So I don't know why all of that played out the way it did, but I think he's a pretty good player. He only got into the end zone 4 times also, so that might have hurt his evaluation last year. And I'm like, I guess you got to blame the offensive line for that maybe, because I want to defend David Montgomery, but like Khalil Herbert had the same offensive line, and he was at over 5.5 yards per carry. So don't quite know what it was with Montgomery last year, but the Lions are going to try and get the best out of him, and I think it's going to work for them. So I gave Montgomery a 6 on a scale of 0 to 10, a little bit better than a middle of the road back, a guy that you can rely on and give the ball to 10, 12, 15 times a game, especially when you have a young stud behind him like Jahmyr Gibbs, who is the Lions' RB2. Initially, when the Lions drafted Jahmyr Gibbs, Gyles, I was skeptical of it. I thought there were some other positions they could have hit on, but then subsequently they ended up trading DeAndre Swift to the Eagles, and then you kind of understood the Lions' strategy there. But they take Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round. I think he's the highest upside running back in the NFC North. I'm not going to call him the best back yet, because you got Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, and you got Alexander Madison, and I just think it's too soon to call him the best back in the division, but I think he's the highest upside back in the division, and I think he is right now the best pass-catching back in the division. Another player where when you turn on just his highlight tape, you can't help but get excited about it. And I see my player comp for Jahmyr Gibbs is Alvin Kamara with the Saints. I think that's who he is. And he may be a better version of Alvin Kamara when all is said and done. A player I really like a lot of, great in the short area, great burst, played at Alabama, scored a lot of touchdowns, complete stud, can totally see why the Lions drafted him where they did. I gave him a 7 out of 7 as an RB2. And then we'll move on. I debated here, Gyles, on RB3 for the Lions. I think there's a few different players you could identify for this spot. I went with old reliable Justin Jackson, the former San Diego / Los Angeles Charger. Modest PFF grade, prototypical, can get by for a game with him guy, just a guy. I think there's an opportunity here for someone else to beat Justin Jackson for a roster spot, but I'm going to give it to Jackson for the time being. Nothing special. I gave him a 2 out of 3. Better than nothing, better than a developmental rookie, but no one who's going to ascend the depth chart and take over a bunch of carries. So he gets a 2. Add all of us up, you get a pretty decent grade for the Lions. 6 for Montgomery, 7 for Gibbs, 2 for Jackson. Lions come in at 15.
There we go. I adjusted a little bit differently than yours because of his first round draft status. I put Jahmyr Gibbs as RB1. Now maybe that's naive and maybe he won't slide into that right away. But considering he was the 12th overall pick, I was assuming that they were going to put him right into RB1 if he can actually stay on the field, which I do project exactly what you're mentioning. I think he has a tremendous amount of upside. This guy is actually pretty phenomenal when you look at across all of his stats. He's 21 years old, 5'9", 200 pounds from Alabama. He has pretty phenomenal grades across the board. He graded an 80.1 across the board at Alabama last year. He had an 82.6 in the run. He had almost an 80 in receiving. Like you mentioned, I think this is an Alvin Kamara type. He has some pretty decent upside to him, and I'm really excited to see what he can do on the Lions' offense. In fact, when I see someone like this, I'm really excited that TJ Hawkinson is no longer a Lion, because I think if you were to pair this with TJ Hawkinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, this Lions offense would have been unstoppable with all three of those players. So I'm really excited that TJ, not as only a Viking, but I'm glad that he's not a Lion. So, yes. I think that's going to make some pretty tremendous strides for the Minnesota Vikings. But at the end of the day, with all the different factors that Jahmyr Gibbs brings to the table, I did give him a 5 out of 10 simply because he's a rookie. But I give him an upside of an 8 or a 9. I really do. I'm really high on Jahmyr Gibbs. His draft status and his draft placement was not surprising to me. Some people call that a little bit high for a running back, but I do see a lot of upside for the Crimson Tide man now and as a Lion. So I do give a 5 out of 10 for him. And then obviously moving on to David Montgomery. He's 26 years old, 5'11", 224 pounds from Iowa State. I am not as high on him as you are. I think when you look at across all the different categories, overall PFF grade, rushing, yards per carry, pass blocking, he scored out for me as a 2 out of 7 when I do the simple data elements. Now, I do think he's better than a 2 out of 7. I brought him up to a 4 out of 7, but I think it was just barely into the 4 category. I think he did get 801 yards, I think, last year. He had 201 carries. He had a 67.9 grade. So I think he's okay. I don't think he's phenomenal in a lot of categories. I think he is a bit overrated, but I do think that he is not a train wreck either, right? So when I think about grading him, I do give him a 4 out of 7 against my data-backed formula, so to speak. So I do give him a 4 out of 7, but I do think he needs to prove it now that he's in a new offense. So I'm really excited to see what the Lions do for him. And then moving on to Justin Jackson, I do agree. I think he's all reliable. He's a guy that's 27 years old, 6 foot even. He's 199 pounds from Northwestern. I think he was drafted 2018 by the Chargers, actually, in the round 7, I believe. So he is a guy that he started off in 2018 hot and heavy. He was a 77 grade and then an 84 grade, then a 78 grade between 2018 and 2020. And then the moment he got to 2021, he fell off a cliff. And I can't tell if he's had a lingering injury or what's going on, but I think he started his career very well and has trailed off from there. So I'm excited to see what he can do now that he's suiting up. Maybe he's healthy, to see what he can do from that standpoint. But I think the Lions have a pretty high upside when it comes to the running back room. But starting off, I have Jahmyr Gibbs at a 5 out of 10. I have David Montgomery as a 4 out of 7, and then Justin Jackson as a 2 out of 3, totaling up to an 11 out of 20. But I do expect that this could go as high as a 15 or a 16 out of 20 for the Lions if all things hit correctly.
Right. And, and this is a little bit of semantics and playing around with numbers too, right? Because if I say, you have to put Gibbs in your RB2 spot on that scale of 0 to 7, you'd be up there at a 5 or 6 or 7 for him, and your number would go up, right? But It's interesting. I don't disagree with you that Gibbs may be the true RB1 in time, or maybe even in week one. I think from a talent and production standpoint, he will be their lead guy. I think from a structure, a depth chart standpoint, give respect to the veteran standpoint, the Lions will probably list Montgomery as their RB1, at least to start the season, but Gibbs is going to get more touches than Montgomery over time, for sure. Yep. I think he's a special player, and it took me a little while to warm up to that idea for them, mostly because I'm also higher on DeAndre Swift than a lot of people may be. But it's an interesting running back position or group here in Detroit because they were pretty good last year at this position. They had DeAndre Swift, and then they had Jamal Williams. And they lost both of those guys. Williams goes to the Saints. They trade Swift to the Eagles. But now they have Montgomery and Gibbs, and I think you can argue that this is a better duo.
Yes.
It kind of depends on how you really feel about Montgomery. But even you, Gyles, who you may not be the highest on Montgomery, you still feel it's probably an upgraded room compared to last year. So
110%.
Okay, yeah. So we'll be interesting to see what happens there. I think Gibbs will ascend and be the main guy, and Montgomery will be a complementary piece, and it's a pretty solid room for the Detroit Lions. Okay, Green Bay. A team that we've discussed, Gyles, that is going to lean on this position group, this room, in the 2023 season, with as green a collection of receivers, tight ends, and quarterbacks as you can possibly have in the NFL. I mean, basically, other than the fact that Jordan Love is not a true rookie because he was drafted a few years ago and just sat and watched Aaron Rodgers. Other than that, it's as green as it can get. And when you consider the fact that Love hasn't really been a starter at all, it is as green as you can get. So this position is very key for the Green Bay Packers along with the offensive line. The good news for the Packers is they have two really good players here, and we're going to talk about them right now. We'll start with Aaron Jones, who was the highest graded running back in the NFC North last year, I do believe. A 3-down back who can run anywhere, has great speed, has good hands, a leader, great story, great character, great background and pedigree. 5th-round pick out of, I believe it's Texas El Paso. It's UTEP or UTSA?
Yeah. Yeah, UTEP. Yep.
UTEP, yeah. Out of UTEP, 5th-round pick, and then ascended and became the bell cow for the Packers. Had a lot of good years with Aaron Rodgers. He comes in with the highest grade in this exercise for me, as well as the highest PFF grade in the NFC North last year. I give Aaron Jones an 8 on a scale of 0 to 10. Can't ask much more from a back. He may not be a true elite home run hitter like you had maybe with Adrian Peterson back in the day. So he falls short of that category or tier. But really, it's about all you can ask for out of the running back position. His complement is A.J. Dillon. He's the RB2. A player, I believe, Gyles, who would be a starter on every team in the NFC North and a lot of teams in the NFC and across the league. Really good player. More of a downhill between the tackles runner than Jones is, although Jones is good at that. A.J. Dillon is great at that. Jones is a little bit better on the periphery, on the outside, and as a pass catcher, Dillon, not going to throw a lot of balls to him, not going to necessarily have him in on 3rd downs, but he can start for you. He can run between the tackles. He can play short yardage, goal line. A really good player. On a scale of 0 to 7 for A.J. Dillon, he gets a 7. I don't know what more you could want out of a complimentary back. He could be a starter for almost every other team in the NFC, if not every team. And then the RB3 for Green Bay, I selected Patrick Taylor. Don't know much about him. He did play a little bit last year, had a modest PFF grade. Not going to get many looks or reps, could easily be overtaken by another young player on this roster. So I gave him a 1 on a scale of 0 to 3. Jones 8, Dillon 7, Taylor 1. That comes out to a 16. A pretty pithy evaluation there, but there's really not much to say. Everyone knows these top two guys. They're really good players. A really solid room of running backs for the Green Bay Packers.
If I could switch out my running back room for any team in the NFL, it might be the Packers, honestly. Really in love with this dynamic pairing. I think Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon are a 1-2 punch. Starting with Aaron Jones, love this guy. He's 28 years old, 5'9", 208 pounds from UTEP, like you mentioned. He was drafted in 2017. He had an 86.1 grade last year. He had 214 carries for just over 1,100 yards. He didn't have many touchdowns. He only had two touchdowns, but he had 5.3 yards per carry and 3.2 yards after contact. I think this guy is elite in pretty much every category. He could improve a little bit in pass protection, but I did give him an 8 out of 10. If he was better in pass protection, I might even be willing to give him a 9 out of 10 because he was the 7th overall graded player in the entire NFL. He was 2nd at rushing, 6th in yards per carry. I mean, this is exactly what you want in a running back. So if he would want to leave the men in Green Bay and come over to the men in purple, I would definitely agree to it. That would be quite phenomenal. This would be a great addition to the Vikings, but unfortunately, he's a Packer for now. But I guess time will tell. Moving on to A.J. Dillon, 25 years old, 6'0", 247 pounds from Boston. He was drafted in 2020. He had an 81.4 grade last year with 185 carries, reaching 769 yards. This guy had 7 touchdowns. I think when you think about ultimately the Packers' usage of this guy, he's a touchdown red zone guy. Obviously, he's used in a lot of other formats as well, but when they need to punch it through, A.J. Dillon's the guy. I mean, if you've seen ever a picture of this guy or a video of him, he's maybe one of the thickest running backs in the NFL.
Oh, yeah.
It's a big old dude. And ultimately, he was still the 12th overall ranked running back last year out of 60. So they had basically 2 top 15 or almost top 10 running backs last year. He was 5th in rushing, 37th in yards per carry, and about top 3rd in pass protection. So I did give him a 5 out of 7. I think if he was better in a little bit better in yards per carry and pass blocking, I think I could give him maybe a 6 out of 7. But this is an elite RB2. He is the number 1 RB2 in the league right now, I think, unless you could give a better disagreement. But I think, this guy is exactly what you want in an RB2. And moving on to Patrick Taylor, this is a guy that I think he's another guy. In 2021, he had a pretty good year. He had a 79.8 grade. And then last year, he dipped a little bit. So I think if he can bounce back into a 2021 form, I think you can get him back into a better posture. But I did give him a 1 out of 3. I think there's some things that could be improved. But at the end of the day, I do believe the Packers have the best running back in the NFC North, maybe even the entire NFL. So I gave them a 14 out of 20 score. Really excited to see what they put on the field in every other game except for the Vikings.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, Gyles. Like, Green Bay has the best running back room, perhaps, in the NFL. But if you look at, they have the best running back in our division, Aaron Jones. They probably have the second best running back in the division, A.J. Dillon.
Yes, that is a great descriptor.
Yeah, so now I think Jahmyr Gibbs projects to probably put a wrench in that idea and be the second best back in the division once the season is over. But going into it, you said it, it's dynamic. It's all you can ask for, and the Packers are going to need every single bit of it this season as they lean heavily on the running back room and the running game in 2023. Okay, let's wrap up the position evaluation by going to the Minnesota Vikings. Also a team that lost its leading rusher from last season, as did the Chicago Bears. So with Alexander Mattison, Gyles, I think you lose a really good, popular player, and the fan base takes a hit, and they're bummed out about that, and they're looking for you to go outside the organization to replace it. But I actually sense some optimism and excitement from Vikings fans about Mattison. And I think that's because the style with which he runs. He ran with that style at Boise State, and he runs with that style in the NFL. And it is a physical, fast, very difficult to bring down type of style. It's almost like the first guy never tackles him. And again, he's not like an elite home run hitter like I kind of described a couple of other backs in this division. I think I talked about Aaron Jones in that way. He's not like a guy where it's like, but watch out, he can score from anywhere like Barry Sanders. It's not that. It's just it's hard to tackle him. And the first and sometimes second guy, they don't bring him down. And Mattison is that type of player. A lower yards per carry maybe than you'd like to see, but did find the end zone 5 times last year, and I think that yards per carry number will go up this year with an improved performance perhaps from the offensive line and just more reps, more touches, more familiarity for Mattison. I think he'll generate a rhythm, and I think he'll be a good player for the Vikings. In the pantheon of NFL backs in 23, he's not elite, but he's way more than serviceable. He's probably not the top tier, but maybe a mid-second tier type of back. So, I gave him a 6, Gyles, but not all 6s are the same, right? Like, did he just creep over a 5'8", 5'9", just creep over 6 and get to 6.1 or 6.2. No, he didn't. He's in the upper 6s, and with a really good season could be mid 7s, by the time this is all said and done. So I don't want that 6 on the scale of 0 to 10 to be looked at as like the arrow pointing down on him. I think the arrow's pointing sideways or up a little bit. I don't think this is a weak spot. I think when you scout the Vikings, you won't look at their running back and say, this is a guy we don't have to really worry about. You gotta take a look at and study Madison. So he gets a 6. I really kind of hemmed and hawed on RB2 and RB3. And I'll be curious to see. Oh, did you also? Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll be curious to see where you landed. I actually went with Ty Chandler as the RB2. Not because I'm excited about that, but because the person who I wanted to put in here, I had to put in at RB3. So, and we'll get to him in a minute. So I went with Ty Chandler. Now, I thought Ty Chandler performed pretty well in the preseason last year and generated a little bit of excitement and was the type of player where I'm like, as like a third running back, a project, really, really good player to have. As an RB2 right now, though, I think you're just a little unsettled and you're a little unsure. Now, if he does again in the preseason what he did last year, if he does that again this year, then you feel really solid and you feel like you got a sound RB2. So I give Chandler a 4 on the scale of 0 to 7, which is a pretty solid middle of the road grade for an RB2. I like his profile. I like his athleticism. I do think, though, he will be challenged by the RB3. So Chandler gets a 4. Which will tell you that the RB3 for me is not Kene Nwangwu. It is Dwayne McBride.
Yeah.
A player that I was really excited about the Vikings drafting after they drafted him, and I researched what the deal was, and I talked to a couple of people with the Vikings, and I'm like, how in the heck is this dude there in the 7th round? And they gave me a little bit of context about his situation, and now I understand why he was there in the 7th round, but that does not mean that things won't work out the right way for him on and off the field, and he won't be a good player. From a skills standpoint, he's got what it takes to play in the NFL and be a contributor. 7th rounder out of UAB. I'll let you get into some of the specifics on the grades, but wow, what a PFF grade he got last year at UAB. 7.3 yards per carries, 19 touchdowns last year. The guy had 36 touchdowns over 3 years at UAB. So I'm really excited to see what he can do as a contributor. I see him making the roster, Gyles, and I see the Vikings probably finding a way to use him from time to time over the course of the season. So I gave him a 3 on a scale of 0 to 3. So add it all up, Madison 6, Chandler 4, McBride 3. The Vikings come in at 13.
There we go. This is an area where we might deviate a little bit. I'm usually a person of positivity and want to look at the upside here, but there's something about this running back room that makes it a little bit harder for me than most positions to try to find the positives, because I think we might have the worst running back room in the NFC North. In fact, I firmly believe that. And I think that's something that's not meant to say, oh, we're going to be horrible as a team, but I definitely think that's going to be our biggest deficiency as an organization. When I look at across every position, running back might be the biggest one. Starting off with Alexander Madison. I think he was a solid RB2. I am not as high on him as an RB1, to be honest. He is 25 years old. He's 5'11", 215 pounds from Boise State. Yep. He had 74 carries for 284 yards last year. He did have 5 touchdowns, so I will say that he's really good at getting in the end zone. But aside from that, he only had 3.8 yards per carry, 2.8 yards after contact. He ranked statistically as a 4 out of 10. On my model, which I ultimately gave him a 6 because I do believe he is better than a 4 out of 10. But I think there's an area where he needs to improve quite a bit. I think he was pretty good in rushing across the board, but when it came to yards per carry, he was in the bottom 10%. He was in the bottom 10% for pass blocking. He is not great in a lot of categories when I look at it statistically. So this is where I'm really having to marry the art and science here, because I was okay with him going into this exercise, and after coming out, I'm like, oh boy, I am now feeling a lot more concerned. I really hope that maybe he can improve now that he gets more carries. I think if you're looking into the zeros and ones of all of this, I think he was obviously down in a lot of pass blocking reps, and then obviously they ran the ball. So I think I think there's an opportunity for that to change a little bit, and I'm excited to see how he reacts to that. So I'm really rooting for him. Obviously, as a Minnesota Vikings fan, I also know that Alexander Mattison is a phenomenal human being. So really excited to see if he can improve upon that. But based on last year's performance, there's a lot to be seen. So I'm really hoping that he can improve upon that. And then for RB2, we actually picked the same guy, Ty Chandler. Really excited about this guy. I think he has a lot of upside, but is still quite unproven. I'm kind of surprised because he's kind of an older RB2 considering the fact that he is just getting some actual reps now. He's 25 years old, 5'11", 204 pounds. He's very, very light from North Carolina. We drafted him in 2022. He had a 54.0 PFF grade last year. He had 6 carries for 20 yards. He had 3.3 yards per carry, 2.3 yards after contact. So I think I'm excited to see, similar to Alexander Mattison, if we can improve upon that, because when I saw him in the preseason, I was very excited. Now, I think when he had his limited reps in the actual season, I think he had some areas of opportunity, so to speak. So I did give him a 2 out of 7, mostly because he is, for all intents and purposes, a rookie when it comes to actually playing NFL regular season snaps. And I do think there's a lot of upside. I think there's a chance that he could be a 4 or 5 if he is what I think he could become. But I think he needs a little bit of more work to go into the season. So I really hope for RB1 and RB2 that we get better, because if they remain at their current posture, I think that we're going to have a pretty rough year when it comes to rushing the football. So then moving on to RB3, the guy that I'm most excited about for the Minnesota Vikings is obviously DeWayne McBride. He is someone that I am, like you, so surprised that he fell into the 7th round, because every year that he was at UAB, he did phenomenally. He ended the year in 2022 at a 94.1 grade. He had a 93.5 in rushing. He was great at receiving. He had essentially 1,700 yards with 233 attempts. This guy's phenomenal. He had 7.3 yards per attempt. 7.3 yards per carry. That is phenomenal. He had 4.6 yards after contact, which is also phenomenal. His longest was a 78-yarder. This guy is quite phenomenal across every category. So obviously we're hoping that those off-the-field issues improve, because if he can translate this success to the NFL, this is phenomenal. I think we actually have a pretty phenomenal player. I did give him a 2 out of 3 because he is a rookie, and that does need to actually translate into the NFL. I think there's been a weird silence surrounding DeWayne McBride when it comes to training camp. I'm surprisingly not hearing a lot of his name, and I don't know why that is, because I was really exciting to see him pop in training camp. So I think it'll be interesting to see what he does in the preseason and in the joint practices. But I'm really hoping that he can improve and translate that performance, because I think he could slip into RB1 or RB2, honestly, if he can actually translate that. So that will cease to be seen. But at the end of the day, they still have a 10 out of 20 score with their existing grades, which is not great. At the current moment of time, they do have the worst running back unit in the NFC North.
Yeah, I came in with them at 13, a little bit above you, Gyles. So they're second to last. Chicago's last for me. You have the Vikings last. Either way, I believe we both have Green Bay number 1 and Detroit number 2. So that's how it shook out in the NFC North this year. Some ground to make up for the Bears and Vikings in that regard. I think the Bears are more likely to make up that ground because of the ceiling of Rashawn Johnson and the opportunity that he will have to ascend the depth chart. I don't think McBride will have that same opportunity early on. And I think, Gyles, I was thinking about your opinion that McBride has not popped or gotten the pub in camp that maybe one would have hoped for or seen. And I think the reason for that is because both of the players ahead of him on the depth chart are trying to work their way up into a position, so they are being fed reps and opportunities to prove that they can be given the job that the team is trying to give them.
That's fair.
So it's not one of those deals like if you were the Chargers with Austin Eckler right now, you kind of ease off on him on training camp. So if you're a young ascending player with some unknown and you play at the running back position for the Chargers, you might have a chance to like stand out and pop a little bit because you're resting Eckler, you're saving Eckler because you know what you have in him. The Vikings don't know that with Madison and Chandler. They're trying to work those guys into it. So that would be my opinion on why you're not seeing some highlights and seeing some buzz and pub around McBride in training camp. As we transition out of this position evaluation discussion, this is a pretty good segue to what I wanted to talk about before we wrapped it up here today, and that was Jordan Addison, who is getting buzz and pub with training camp.
My goodness.
Looked like he had a pretty good night practice over the last week, and a player who seems like he's getting a lot of reps in practice, and I think is going to definitely get the WR2 opportunity early in the season. We've talked many times. TJ Hawkinson really is the second receiver in this offense, but from a positional standpoint, he's a tight end. From a wide receiver standpoint, WR2 definitely. Like I love KJ Osborne more as much as anyone, but I think Addison's going to get every opportunity to get those numbers and those reps. What do you think?
Honestly, this is going to sound outlandish the moment I'm saying it out loud, but you know who he reminds me of in training camp? Jordan Addison, who he reminds me of? He reminds me of Justin Jefferson in his rookie year training camp. Okay. He was just so fluid. It looked so natural. Like, you know, there's a rookie learning curve that happens where you need to learn the playbook. You need to learn NFL speed. There's a lot of different things being thrown at you, literally and figuratively. And JJ was so fluid, where everyone's like, oh my gosh, he's doing great. And I don't even think people realize what he was at that point. He didn't even play for two games for other reasons. But I saw a fluidity there that I see in Jordan Addison. And I'm not saying that he's going to be Justin Jefferson, but if he can be a sliver of what that is, I think we have found ourselves a really amazing player. Because if you can, like we've talked about before, if you can really punch people in the mouth, or other teams, so to speak, when they take away Justin Jefferson, if they commit all their resources to taking him away, you need to be able to punish them for that. And if you can truly properly punish other teams are not going to commit to just blocking Justin Jefferson, and that's going to open our playbook wide open. So I'm really, really excited to see what those pairings are, because if you have Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, and Jordan Addison running 12 personnel, you throw in some Josh Oliver, love me some Josh Oliver, you're going to have some pretty amazing success when it comes to the Minnesota Vikings. It's just a matter of what you can do with the running backs.
That's right. Yep, that's right, which we're a little bearish on, if you couldn't tell from earlier in this episode. But, they may not be leaning on the running backs very heavily this year if Addison can realize his potential. The Vikings did sign N'Keal Harry at the wide receiver position, former first-round pick of the New England Patriots, I believe out of Arizona State, has spent some time with other teams in the league, including the Chicago Bears. We'll see what happens there. I don't have too high of expectations. A couple other things I wanted to bounce off you, though, before we go, Gyles. The injury to James Lynch hurts the Vikings' depth on the interior of the defensive line. There are some pretty solid free agents out there. You mentioned Akeem Hicks, and before we started recording, there's also Shelby Harris. So some options out there for the Vikings. I would anticipate they'll sign someone to fortify their depth. If they sign someone like Harris or Hicks, they fortify their starting position, but they could go a notch below that and sign someone for depth. So wanted to bring that up and see if you had any ideas or opinions on the James Lynch injury.
Yeah, no, honestly, with that going down, I was really excited to have him as a backup rotational player, because the defensive line is obviously very important. That does make me a little bit more inclined to say we should try to find a defensive lineman to sign. But obviously the Vikings are bringing a lot of different players in from different positions to test drive them and see obviously how they can improve their team for 2023. They've brought in people like Dalton Reisner as a guard position to see if they can improve that. They've brought in a variety of other players. They brought in, I believe, Ronald Darby from the Broncos this past week. He was a pretty phenomenal cornerback last year. He's getting kind of old. I think he's 29 or 30 years old, but that could be a nice signing in the backfield. Yep. But I don't know. I go back and forth on what is the best position to go tackle. Now, if you're looking at running back, this is a wild thought process, but what would you give up to go get Jonathan Taylor?
Man.
Rookie contract. You would be trading for a year or two of rookie contract. Obviously, they're in a stalemate over there in Colts country, but
I wouldn't do it if I was the Vikings.
Okay,
I wouldn't. I think that he's good enough to build your offense around, and I think he's worthy of really significant compensation to go get him in a trade. But I don't think the Vikings are built to have a back like this. I mean, he would make anyone better. I'm not saying he wouldn't make the Vikings better, but I almost feel like you would handcuff O'Connell's creativity with this offense.
That's fair.
If you, it's so weird to be like, you had this really, really good player and you're handcuffing the play caller. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good way to articulate this, but I just feel
he would
like
demand carries.
He would, and I think that would take away from the idea and the ability to build concepts and execute on those concepts with a sophisticated passing attack that O'Connell can deploy effectively with Kirk Cousins at his disposal. So I would recommend against doing that if I was the Vikings. I think they'd be wise to allocate resources to other places. Now, for a team, though, to go get him, a team that needs a running back to go get him, I think it's significant compensation. I mean, I think it's a first-round pick, probably.
Think so? Okay. I wasn't sure with a year or two left on the rookie scale contract, how much that would bleed with an existing running back market that is so saturated. Because normally I would have said absolutely yes. His performance is clearly communicated. He's one of the best backs in the league. But with the downward trend in running back rooms, now I'm starting to question it. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's a second-round pick because you're right. You're going to have to pay him. After you trade, you wouldn't trade for him without some sort of handshake agreement that there's a contract in place as well. So whoever would theoretically trade for him would the team. Let's just say that was the Houston Texans. The Texans would request from the Colts permission to negotiate a contract with Taylor, and then once those negotiations progressed to a point where Houston felt comfortable, they would then also work out compensation to trade for him. I think that's what you would have to do. There's no way you'd give up a first or second round pick for a back whose contract is going to be up in 2 years and then lose him to free agency. So
that's fair.
I don't think it's going to end up happening. I think that they're going to posture against each other for a while and he'll end up staying with the Colts. That's my guess.
Okay. No, that's completely fair. That might end up happening.
Yeah, but we'll see. I mean, I think he's a really good player and he'd be a foundational player. You know, I've been waiting for a particular team to sign a back, with Dalvin Cook being a free agent and now with Jonathan Taylor. And that team is the Carolina Panthers. Since they traded McCaffrey away, I'm waiting for them for the other shoe to drop here at the running back position. And it just hasn't. And I don't know the ins and outs of their cap situation or their draft capital that they have in reserve, but I think they'd be a team to watch for Jonathan Taylor. So. And
there's obviously a personal connection between Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook if he did want to go to suit up in blue over there. That could be interesting.
Yeah, and with Jonathan Taylor, it's with Frank Reich. Right?
So, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, so I don't know. We'll see if the Panthers end up making a move like that. I think the Panthers are a sneaky, harder to beat than you think team.
And I think they are poised to win the Super Bowl next year, or at least make a play for it. I think they're going to be a real contender next year.
Yeah. So anyway, we'll see what happens at the running back position. Dalvin Cook remains unsigned. Jonathan Taylor, acrimony in Indianapolis. So lots to sort of chew on there. That'll be something we can talk about in future episodes of the Wobcast 2.0. Speaking of that, future episodes of the Wobcast 2.0, we will do safeties next week as we continue our position evaluation, as we look at every position on every team in the NFC North to see where the Vikings stack up. So we'll take a look at the safeties next week. We're not going to do specialists in this exercise, but I did want to ask you, are you settled at kicker, Gyles?
I don't know if I am, because I've been hearing some negative rumblings out of training camp that Greg Joseph isn't performing as well as I would prefer.
Yeah, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. That's not a position, that you want to be unsettled at, and the Vikings have been for a long time, unfortunately. Dalton Risner visits but doesn't sign. Immediate upgrade at guard. Probably over Ed Ingram. Kirk Cousins wore a number 66 practice jersey the other day. Subliminally supporting him, not so subtly, I guess, supporting him. Why not?
Is that an indictment against Ed Ingram, do you think? Because obviously Dalton Risner was a left guard for his entire career. Is there a chance that they would trade Ezra Cleveland because he's in the last year of his deal?
Oh, man. Maybe. I didn't think of that. Maybe.
So that it's either Ed Ingram, obviously, or Ezra Cleveland, but I couldn't tell if that was, we saw Ed Ingram for the first week of camp and he is not improved from what we thought he would. Let's replace him, or is it, all right, let's get smart here over the long term and trade Ezra Cleveland and give Dalton Risner a multi-year contract?
Maybe it's that.
I don't know.
Maybe it's that, because they got to pay so many people that maybe they don't want to pay Cleveland as they want to, but they can't because they got to pay Hawkinson, they got to pay Jefferson.
Yep. For the sake of this year, I really hope it would be Ezra Cleveland and Risner. I mean, I'm really high on Ed Ingram if he can improve his rookie mistakes, but if he can't, you got to get him off the field.
I think Risner/Reisner would be the caliber of upgrade that who were you banging the drum for last year? Treader, JC Treader.
Oh yeah, JC Treader. Yeah,
that'd be like at that level or higher. Because Treader's a little bit longer in the tooth, so it might even be a better signing than that one.
Yep.
So I don't know what they're waiting for.
Graded pass protection.
Yes. I don't know what they're waiting for, if it's in the offing or not. Same with Dalvin Cook to the Jets. A little bit of rumbling there that it would happen after the Hall of Fame game, which the Jets participated in over the weekend. So wait and see what happens with Dalvin Cook. But Gyles' dream of Cook coming back still lives. It still lives, but it might be on life support. And then finally, before we go, we got a preseason game coming up, Gyles, August 10th.
So excited.
So let's see. Today's the 7th. So the 10th is what, Thursday? That game's on Thursday?
I believe so.
Football back on your TVs on Thursday as the Vikings take on the Seattle Seahawks in Seattle for a 9 p.m. Central Time kickoff, Thursday, August 10th. We'll get some real football. It doesn't count, but it's real football. We'll get to watch the progress the Vikings have made over the offseason in training camp on the actual football field on our TV. So that'll be exciting. It's preseason, but, I mean, we're still nerdy enough to get excited about it.
Oh, my goodness. This is what I've been waiting for since the Giants game. This is finally the men in purple getting suited back up again. This is going to get wild. I'm excited to see all the backup units because obviously the Vikings don't play their starters, but I'm really excited to see a lot of these position competitions come to fruition and see who actually can show up and show out.
Yep, me too. All right, well, we've done enough damage for today, Gyles. We're going to wrap it up here. We will be back next week with another episode of the Wobcast 2.0. We will evaluate safeties in the NFC North to see where the Minnesota Vikings stack up relative to their division foes. We'll break down the Vikings preseason game, and we'll look ahead to their next 2 preseason games as the preseason is set to get underway for the purple and gold. So until we're back again next time, we're going to sign off. For now, on behalf of Gyles, I am Wobby. Make sure you like and subscribe to the Wobcast 2.0. You can find us wherever you find all your other favorite podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We're also on YouTube, so make sure you go find us there and watch us talk instead of just listen to us. That's going to do it for now. On behalf of Gyles, this is Wobby signing off. Until next time, Skol Vikings.